All right, welcome everyone. Today, we are diving into a really cool Python tool that honestly can make your life so much easier. We're talking about making your application testing faster, way more reliable, and just less of a headache, especially when your code has to talk to the internet. Let's jump right in.
So here's the plan. We're going to start with a problem I'm sure many of you know all too well, the network testing headache. Then we'll meet the solution, VCR.py, and you'll see how to make your first cassette. After that, we'll get into some real-world patterns, the pro tips. And finally, we'll talk about when not to use it, which is just as important.
Okay, first things first. Let's talk about the pain of testing code that has to talk to the internet. I mean, if you've ever had to write tests for code that makes live HTTP requests to some external API, you already know the struggle is real.
So yeah, why is this so painful? If you've ever been pulling your hair out over this, trust me, you are not alone. Let's really dig into the specifics of why this is such a common and, frankly, persistent headache for so many of us developers.
Well, for starters, as Alex Chan points out in a great article, these tests are just slow. You're waiting for a real server to respond, which can take forever. They're also super unreliable and flaky. I mean, what happens if the network connection drops or the API you're testing against goes down? Boom, your tests fail for reasons that have nothing to do with your code. They're also brittle. The server side changes one little thing, and your entire test suite can just break. Plus, you have to deal with managing sensitive API keys and secrets, which is a whole other can of worms. And debugging all this, it's a nightmare. So yeah, there has to be a better way. And that better way? Well, it's called VCR.py. This is the elegant solution we've been looking for. Let's dive in and see how this library completely flips the script on how we test network-dependent code.
So what exactly is VCR.py? Think of it like an old-school video cassette recorder, from back in the day. But instead of recording TV shows, it records your application's HTTP interactions. The very first time you run your test, VCR.py hits the record button. After that, it just hits play, replaying that exact same interaction every single time, without ever touching the network again. Okay, so this is where the magic happens. Let's walk through the process. The first time your test runs, VCR.py jumps in and intercepts that outgoing HTTP request. It lets the request go through to the real server, just once. Then, and this is the key part, it records the server's entire response, the status, the headers, the body, everything, and saves it to a simple file called a cassette. Now, for every single test run after that, VCR.py intercepts the request again, but this time, it doesn't go out to the internet. Nope. It just plays back the response directly from that cassette file. The result? Your tests are suddenly lightning fast and completely deterministic.
All right, so how do you actually get started with this? You're going to love how simple it is. Let's look at a really practical example using PyTest, which is a super popular testing framework in the Python world.
No, seriously. This is it. All you have to do is add one line of code. It's called a decorator. If you're using the PyTest VCR plugin, you just add @pytest.mark.vcr right on top of your test function. That's it. You write the rest of your test exactly like you normally would. VCR.py just works. It automatically handles all the complicated stuff, the recording, the replaying, all of it behind the scenes. So the first time you run that test with the decorator, VCR.py springs into action. It performs the real network request, and then automatically it creates a new folder in your project called cassettes. Inside that folder, it saves the recording as a file. Pretty neat, right? And here's what that cassette file actually looks like. It's just a simple, human-readable YAML file. You can see it's got the original request with the method and the URL, and right below it, you've got the exact response that came back from the server, the status code, the content, everything. The best part? You just commit this file to your Git repository along with your code. Now that test has a perfect, unchanging response ready to go forever. Okay, the basics are awesome, right? But in the real world, things get a little more complicated. So let's level up and look at a few patterns that you'll definitely need when you start using this in your actual projects.
So here's the first big gotcha you're going to run into. VCR.py records everything. And I mean everything, including your API keys, your authorization tokens, all that sensitive stuff. And it saves it in plain text right inside that cassette file. That is a huge security no-no.
But don't worry, there's a solution. VCR.py has really powerful filtering tools. The standard way to do this with PyTest is to create something called a fixture. You can think of a fixture as just a bit of setup code for your tests. Here, we're making a VCR config fixture. And inside it, we're telling VCR.py, Hey, before you save the cassette, find the authorization header and any API key parameters and replace their values with these redacted placeholders. This way, your secrets never even touch the file.
Okay, next problem. What if you want to apply the same setting to all of your tests? You don't want to repeat yourself, right? A perfect example is telling VCR Pi to just ignore any requests made to localhost, your own machine. You almost never want to record those. And the solution is that same VCR config fixture we just talked about. It's the perfect place for global settings. You can just add an ignore hosts key and tell it to ignore localhost. Another really useful setting here is the record mode. Setting it to once is a great safety net. It means VCR will only record a cassette if one doesn't already exist. If it's there, it won't try to re-record, which stops you from accidentally hitting a live API when you don't mean to.
Okay, this one's a bit more advanced. By default, VCR finds the right recording by matching the URL and the request method, right? But what if your request body has something that changes every time, like a timestamp or unique ID? The default matching won't work anymore. This exact issue came up on Stack Overflow. Someone asked, can you match requests using your own custom rules?
And the answer is a big, resounding yes. This is where VCR.py really shows its flexibility. You can actually write your own Python functions to tell it exactly how to match a request. So you could, for example, write a function that compares two JSON request bodies but completely ignores the timestamp field. You just register your custom matcha function, add its name to the match on list, and boom, you have complete control.
Now, VCR.py is an amazing tool. It really is, but it's not a silver bullet. No tool is. So a big part of using it effectively is knowing its limits and knowing when it's time to reach for a different tool in your toolbox. Alex Chan's guide brings up some great points here. For example, testing specific network errors like a server timeout or a 500 error. It's really hard to reliably record those because they're unpredictable. Another one is large binary files like images or videos. Storing those in a text-based cassette file is super inefficient. And finally, what if you're building a feature for an API change that hasn't happened yet? You can't record a response that doesn't exist. In all these cases, you're probably better off using a more traditional mock object that you create yourself.
But here's the bottom line. For the vast majority of your API interactions, VCR.py is a game changer. It's going to make your test suite so much faster, way more reliable, and completely independent of flaky network connections. You're basically creating this perfect high-fidelity snapshot of how your app talks to the outside world. So the question I'll leave you with is this. Think about your own projects. Where could this record and replay approach make the biggest difference? Where could it save you time and headaches? Thanks so much for watching.